The case of Asal Nagabayeva. The case of a fragile young woman who begged the state for help and requested protection, yet the authorities displayed complete indifference. Asal Nagabayeva was born in 1986 in the city of Tokmak, Chuy Oblast, Kyrgyzstan. After finishing school, she completed hairdressing courses and moved to Bishkek to find work in a salon. It is easy to get lost in a large city, but sometimes it is even easier to meet people there. One day, Azamat Estebasov came to the hairdresser's shop where Asal worked to get a new haircut. He was very taken with the pretty, slender girl and invited her for a cup of fragrant coffee. The meeting proved fateful for both of them. Azamat also liked Asal very much. He appeared to be a simple and attentive man, raised in a prosperous family and very hardworking. Asal's family approved of their daughter's choice because Azamat was very religious and respected Muslim traditions. Asal's parents saw no disadvantages in the groom and wholeheartedly blessed the marriage. At the age of 19, Asal married her beloved Azamat. Soon after, the young family welcomed their first child, a boy. It seems every man dreams of an heir, someone to continue the family name. But in this story, the joy of fatherhood, like a genie released from a bottle, unleashed Azamat's cruel demons. One ordinary evening, a simple family moment became a true drama, setting off a series of tragic events. Asal and Azamat were bathing their son. The inexperienced father accidentally poured too much water on the child. He shook with fright and cried intensely. Asal reacted harshly and shouted at her husband. In response, Azamat did not hesitate to strike her in the face. That same evening, Asal took the child and went to her mother's house. Azamat repented and asked for forgiveness. He begged and promised it would never happen again. It is worth noting that the Kyrgyz mindset is markedly different from other cultural mindsets. From a young age, girls are taught the value of patience. Divorce is generally frowned upon, though not forbidden, and the Muslim faith plays a significant role in creating and preserving families through various means. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. Knowing the traditions and customs of a Turkic family, Asal, who grew up without a father, did not want her son to experience a similar fate. She believed Azamat's violent outburst was a one-time occurrence, and that they could continue living harmoniously. However, Asal's return proved her wrong. A year later, the family moved from Bishkek back to her native Tokmak to live near her parents. The return was joyful because Asal was expecting her second child. Asal was walking with her son on the playground near her home when she met several classmates. They greeted each other and had a pleasant conversation. However, on returning home from the walk, Asal received another severe blow to the face. The strike was so forceful that she fell and slipped on the linoleum. Tragically, this blow and fall triggered a miscarriage. After moving to Tokmak, Azamat became obsessed with Asal. He followed her discreetly on the streets, continuously seeking reasons for new conflicts. He had developed a taste for it and could no longer resist the urge to beat her, though the kind and attentive man Asal had once known was completely replaced by someone consumed by anger and hatred. Asal resigned herself to living under his absolute control for the sake of her children. Even after Asal's mother, aware of the family drama, took Asal to her own home, the abuse did not cease. Azamat kept returning, begging for forgiveness and promising it would not happen again. Tradition intervened, as in Kyrgyzstan, a son must grow up with his father, and Asal ended up returning home 5 times. Life became a nightmare for Asal, and she attempted to seek help from the police. However, there is no criminal sentence for domestic violence in Kyrgyzstan. The maximum penalty applied to Azamat was a 3-day stay in an isolation center, after which he would return, and the cycle repeated itself for 6 years. Azamat did not even consider divorce. He threatened that if Asal filed for it, he would find and kill her, the children, and her family. During the worst of the beatings, Asal's family took her to Italy, where she worked tirelessly as a nurse, cleaner, and dog walker, saving money for an apartment and a small business to become financially independent and leave her tyrannical husband. After 3.5 years in Italy, Asal had saved enough to achieve her goals. During this time, she had seen many new things, interacted with interesting people, and gradually regained her mental stability. However, her maternal heart ached for her children, whom she had been forced to leave for so long, though she was reassured that their father never abused them. Assel's return to Kyrgyzstan revealed her children living in deplorable conditions. A single cramped room where they slept, ate, played, and even used the bathroom. Deprived of education and outdoor activities, they were instead sent to a madrasa, a Muslim religious and educational institution, where they learned religion and the Quran. Azamat had raised them as true Turkic men, subjecting them to harsh and unforgiving circumstances. Determined to escape this cruel captivity, Assel took her children. However, Azamat's relentless pursuit continued, with him calling her and insisting on meeting. Assel remained firm, warning that she would file a police report if he continued to harass her. But her warnings were ignored. One evening, as Assel was on her way to buy dishwashing detergent, Azamat confronted her again. He grabbed her, threatened her with a knife, and took her to a remote, dark location where he brutally beat and raped her. Assel reported the incident to the police, and a criminal case was opened against Azamat. Assel's family was confident that he would be put on trial and the torment would finally end. However, Azamat's family became actively involved, unable to accept that their son was a tyrant. Azamat's mother and sisters repeatedly pleaded with Assel to withdraw the application. In Kyrgyzstan, a woman is not expected to report her husband, as it is considered a great shame. Through deception, they succeeded, and Assel withdrew the application in exchange for Azamat filing for relinquishment of parental rights, though he remains officially their father. The Sakala District Court dismissed the case due to the victim's counter-application and the reconciliation of the parties. Upon his release, Azamat began a new wave of harassment and threats, sending daily threatening messages to Assel. He changed phone numbers to relentlessly continue his pressure. He openly stated in voice messages that if he caught her, he would kill her. He waited for her in the driveway at her workplace and followed her everywhere for 3 months. Assel's relatives took turns living with her and her children, protecting her from Azamat's attacks. But this did not save her from a second act of violence on January 31, 2023. She went to the police again, reporting that her ex-husband had once more used force against her. A criminal case was opened, and the suspect was detained. After the investigation, the case materials were sent to court. The family awaited the decision, expecting a real prison term of at least 5 years. On the day the trial was scheduled, the judge and 2 prosecutors invited Assel to a separate office. Azamat was there, in front of her eyes. They removed his handcuffs, informing him that 3 years of probation had been applied instead of 5 years of imprisonment. In fact, he remained free. The court considered this decision appropriate because Azamat had an elderly mother with a disability and 2 children from his marriage to the victim. Assel was in a state of distress, feeling trapped in the darkest corner with no apparent way out. Despair and fear had once again firmly taken hold of her life. However, Assel decided not to wait for further attacks. She no longer trusted anyone and refused to listen to Azamat's relatives. Assel documented all the abuse, hired a lawyer, and filed an appeal with the regional court. Her lawyers presented all the threats from messages and voice recordings to the court. This time, the case proceeded to trial. But a series of events constantly postponed the hearings, bringing the worst day closer for Assel. First, the lawyer fell ill, and the trial was postponed for a month. The second and third hearings were also postponed for inexplicable reasons. At the fourth hearing, Assel begged that the trial not be postponed further because she feared not beatings but death. Azamat continued to walk freely and attempt to end her life. On the eve of the hearing, he sent her a photo of a black backpack containing a knife and a rope, with the caption, "I am ready to meet you at the bottom." However, because Assel refused the state-appointed lawyer and involved a private lawyer in the case, the hearing was postponed indefinitely. With such indifference from the justice and law enforcement agencies, she had no chance to protect herself. September 20th, 2023 began as usual at 6:30 a.m. Assel woke her children. They had breakfast together, and she accompanied her eldest son to school, wishing him a good day. As she was about to leave the house, she did not close the door. While finishing getting ready, she brushed her hair when the front door suddenly opened. Azamat came in very quickly and aggressively. Assel did not have time to react or lock herself in the bathroom. He immediately struck her twice on the head, after which she fell into a state of confusion, not understanding what was happening. After hitting her head, Azamat grabbed her by the throat and began strangling her. Assel lost consciousness. At times, she heard Azamat's voice, and it seemed like a terrible dream, but the loud crying of her son brought her back to reality. Assel realized that she was awake. The boy covered himself with a blanket and, crying, repeatedly said, "Daddy, don't do it." But his father ordered him to remain silent, threatening that he would harm him as well. Assel did not remember how she went from the bathroom, where she had tried to hide, to the kitchen. He threw the unfortunate woman to the floor like an unwanted object, then picked her up again and continued to abuse her. At one point, the perpetrator lifted Assel once more, leaned her against the wall, and began stabbing her face and neck with a kitchen knife in cold blood. The next time Assel regained consciousness, she looked around and saw everything covered in blood, though she did not fully understand what was happening. She had lost a great deal of blood, and her throat was parched. She kept asking for a drink. Her once beloved husband brought her a bucket filled with rags, containing water mixed with blood. The perpetrator had developed such a strong taste for blood that he selected a knife from the kitchen, testing various options to find one that would reach Assel's heart. Suddenly, the door opened, and police officers entered the house. It turned out that a neighbor from the downstairs apartment had heard the screams and, aware of the difficult situation between Assel and her ex-husband, had called the police, saving her life by preventing further horrific torture. Azamat Estebesov resisted and attacked the officers with a knife. In the ensuing chaos, no one fully grasped the extent of what had happened. The entire apartment was drenched in blood. Azamat had first cut Assel in the bathroom, then dragged her to the kitchen through the hallway. He had cut off her nose and ears and inflicted multiple wounds on her face and neck. He had slashed her throat, mutilated her face, and beaten her severely. District police officers arrived and called an ambulance. After assessing Assel's condition, they hurriedly searched for the severed organs, but they were nowhere to be found. Would it surprise you to know where they were discovered? In the perpetrator's pocket. In pursuit of lost time, the officers transported Assel by car to the 4th City Hospital in Bishkek. There, she was not provided with first aid, as the staff claimed, according to her medical record, that she did not belong to their hospital. The doctors not only failed to administer first aid, but also did not stop the bleeding. Only at a second hospital did she receive first aid and have the bleeding controlled. She was then transferred to the National Hospital, where she underwent a 9-hour surgery. 6 doctors worked meticulously to reconstruct Assel's face. The amputated organs that had been recovered were carefully delivered by the district police officers. The doctors painstakingly collected everything, as the earlobes and nerve nodes had been completely severed. Azamat had carried out the mutilation using a specialized knife. The nose was also entirely severed. In the hospital, Assel did not regain consciousness for a long time. She miraculously survived, but psychologists warned that her recovery would be long and extremely dangerous. She was disfigured. A criminal case under the article for causing grievous bodily harm of the Criminal Code of the Kyrgyz Republic was initiated based on the attack. The police detained the suspect during the investigation, and he was sent to a pretrial detention center on September 27, 2023. That the sentence against Azamat Estebesov was revised to 8 years of imprisonment by presidential decree. 9 judges were dismissed from their positions, including Kelbek Toto Mamatov, the judge of Soyk District Court of CH Region, who had released the man under probation supervision. The presidential decree stated that Toto Mamatov was dismissed due to violations of the requirements of impeccable conduct for a judge. In addition, Sadr Japaro, by decree of November 1st and at the suggestion of the Council of Judges, prematurely terminated the powers of several other judges who, in various ways, had failed to meet the standards of impeccability. 6 investigators were assigned to continue the investigation, reviewing all previous cases involving Azamat Estebesov. They considered all the facts and, based on them, the new indictment included 11 charges. By the end of December 2023, all investigative activities were completed, and on January 9, 2024, the first court hearings commenced. Azamat Estebesov denied guilt for all 11 charges. He persistently avoided answering the judge's questions and, in some instances, claimed he was possessed by a demon that prevented him from speaking. His aggressive behavior toward the witnesses caused delays in the trial. On January 26, 2024, the final closed court session took place. Judge Tul Kader Kalova, after reviewing all the details of the complex case, sentenced Azamat Estebesov to 20 years of imprisonment without the possibility of probation. Additionally, He was ordered to pay 2 million soms to his ex-wife and a fine of 880,000 soms to the state. Despite imprisonment, Azamat continued sending threatening text messages to Asal, warning that he would still find her. The case of Asal Nagabayeva highlighted the powerlessness of women before the law in Kyrgyzstan and demonstrated how a once-loved and caring individual could turn into a cold-blooded monster in an instant. Asal's sister, Diana Yellen, appealed to members of parliament to pass a law on domestic violence, stating that if they did not, she would make them confront Asal's unbandaged face and consider the consequences of their inaction. Asal's sister also launched a petition calling for a life sentence without parole for her sister's ex-husband, recalling that Asal had divorced him 5 years earlier due to beatings and abusive behavior, yet he continued to stalk, assault, and terrorize her even after the divorce. Asal has a new life and identity, but her suffering continues. She will undergo several operations to reconstruct her face, restore the framework of her ears and nose, and address a 20% loss of hearing. The challenge is that such complex procedures are not available in Kyrgyzstan and require very large funds. However, a plastic surgeon from Turkey has offered to perform the surgery free of charge, covering all expenses. Initially, Kyrgyz doctors had informed him that only a portion of Asal's nose remained, but when the surgeon saw her face without bandages, he was deeply shocked. It became clear that plastic surgery alone would not suffice. A complete series of operations would be required to restore both her ears and her nose. The total cost for reconstructive surgery for Asal, who was mutilated by her ex-husband, is estimated at no less than $445,000. Asal's sister, Diana Yellen, who is actively involved in raising awareness and funds for the operation, noted that all complex surgeries will be performed in Turkey. Unfortunately, they have not yet raised even half of the required $445,000. Additionally, there are other expenses for accommodation, psychologists, rehabilitation, interpreters, medications, and so on. Diana Yellen said, "I have more pictures of her without bandages, and they are very frightening. They are not for the faint of heart. I have not been able to come to my senses since yesterday, and I cannot accept this face because there is nothing left of her ears and nose." She expressed gratitude to the doctors for doing everything possible, emphasizing that the most important thing is that sepsis and gangrene did not develop. Diana Yellen also stated that if the necessary funds are not raised soon, she will publish her sister's unbandaged face so that the whole world can see the true face of lawlessness, the true face of a victim of violence. She emphasized that if the judge had not granted probation to this monster a year ago, none of this would have happened. The family and Asal had relied on the law and independent judges, but now they are challenging everyone, issuing a challenge to the judiciary of Kyrgyzstan. Diana has regularly organized events to draw public attention in Kyrgyzstan to the problem of domestic violence against women. So far, fundraising efforts have been held to help restore Asal's health. Despite the horrific ordeal she endured, Asal's resilience is an example of courage and determination in the fight against violence. Asal, who has yet to fully recover mentally and physically from 12 years of abuse, dreams of creating a foundation to help other women who have suffered similar abuse. After experiencing abuse, she cannot stop helping others. To conclude the story, the real ugliness that no one should see is not Asal's face at all, but the essence of her ex-husband. Even with fatigue and pain in her eyes, it is evident that Asal is a very feminine, gentle, and beautiful woman. It does not matter how her face looks now. She is beautiful because her soul and heart are beautiful. She appeals to all women. Never tolerate abuse, and do not expect your partner to change. Run away and never return. Tyrants exist in all nations. Moving on to the next case. The case of Brooke Schuyler Richardson. In Ohio, the Richardson family, consisting of Kim, Scott, and their children Jackson and Schuyler, appeared to be an ordinary family. Schuyler was a cheerleader who struggled with an eating disorder from a young age. Her mother Kim first noticed this when Schuyler was 12 years old and refused to buy gum containing more than 5 calories. As a flyer on the cheerleading team, Schuyler felt pressured to maintain a certain weight. This obsession with her appearance led to a constant fear of gaining weight. During cheer season, Schuyler began vomiting after meals to control her weight, which only worsened her issues. When the season ended, her struggles grew even more severe. Schuyler experienced episodes of binge eating followed by stretches of starvation or extreme dieting. Her parents became worried, but Skylar shut down whenever they attempted to talk to her about it. They sought professional help from several doctors and therapists, who eventually diagnosed Skylar with body dysmorphia, a disorder in which she obsessively focused on a perceived flaw in her appearance. In July 2016, Skylar began dating a friend's cousin, but the relationship did not last long. By January 2017, she had started seeing a new boyfriend, Brandon, and seemed genuinely happy and healthy. Her parents noticed her weight gain and believed her eating disorder was improving. In February, Skylar chose her prom dress, a tightly fitted gown that required her to be laced into it. During a family vacation in mid-March, she wore a two-piece swimsuit and looked great. Her mother, Kim, wanted her to begin taking birth control pills for protection. In mid-April 2017, Skylar visited her mother's gynecologist to get a prescription for birth control. However, during the appointment, the doctor informed Skylar that she was about 8 months pregnant. Skylar asked the doctor not to tell anyone, and her mother remained unaware of the true reason behind her daughter's tears. Skylar and her boyfriend Brandon attended prom on May 5th, despite her advanced pregnancy. 2 months later, on July 14, 2017, the police arrived at the Richardson home. They told Skylar's parents, Kim and Scott, that they needed to talk to the teenager about something she might have witnessed. The officers assured the parents that Skylar was not in trouble and took her at their word. Scott chose to drive Skylar to the police station, uncertain about what was to come. The police wanted to question Skylar regarding a call they had received from a gynecologist's office. A patient of an OB/GYN doctor had delivered a stillborn baby and buried it in their backyard. The police were notified and took Skylar, the patient, into custody for questioning. Her father was not permitted to be present during the initial interview. The police read Skylar her rights and shared the details of the doctor's report. According to the doctor, Skylar had learned about her pregnancy on April 26th, but later reported that the baby was no longer alive and had been buried in the backyard. Skylar admitted to the police that she had given birth to a stillborn baby girl on May 7, 2017. She said she delivered the baby in the bathroom, saw that it was not breathing, and had no heartbeat. Feeling she needed to bury the baby, she went to the backyard, dug a shallow grave, and buried the body. To mark the spot, she placed a vase with a flower at the burial site. The police informed Skylar's parents, Kim and Scott, about the real reason for her detention. They were stunned to learn that Skylar had been pregnant, as they had no idea. They expressed sadness that Skylar had endured this ordeal alone and without their support. Skylar revealed that she had named the baby Annabelle and claimed the father was a close friend's cousin, whom she had briefly dated. Crime scene investigators searched the Richardson backyard, removing weeds and debris to uncover the baby's remains. Despite the obstacles, they found several bones, including fragments of the skull, which they carefully gathered and preserved. After more than 5 hours of questioning, Skylar and her parents were allowed to go back home. However, 6 days later, the police contacted Skylar again, informing her that they had received new information from the coroner's office. They claimed that the baby's bones showed evidence of burning, which Skylar strongly denied. She insisted she would never harm her child. Police suggested that Skylar might have attempted to cremate the baby to hide the evidence, but she continued to deny any wrongdoing. However, Skylar abruptly altered her story, admitting that she might have used a lighter to try to cremate the baby's remains. She also stated that the baby may have been born alive and made a noise or even cried before dying. Skylar confessed to holding the newborn too tightly, which might have contributed to its death. During an extensive interrogation, the police gathered enough evidence to arrest Skylar on a charge of reckless homicide. They believed she had suffocated her baby. After presenting the case to a grand jury, Skylar was indicted and arrested for aggravated murder, which carries a mandatory life sentence in Ohio. At her arraignment, Skylar pleaded not guilty to additional charges of voluntary manslaughter, abuse of a corpse, and child endangerment. She spent the weekend in jail until her family secured a $50,000 bond. Skylar became the focus of a media frenzy following her child's tragic death. The public judged and scrutinized every action she and her family took, placing a significant strain on their well-being. They withdrew into the safety of their home, but even going outside became difficult due to threats and photographers. Even though her defense attorneys believed Skylar had given a false confession, the prosecution continued to pursue the case. Even when the medical examiner retracted her initial report of burning, The prosecution held onto Schuyler's admission that she had attempted to cremate the remains. Throughout this time, Schuyler's family faced immense stress and fear. The public attention and threats made their lives unbearable, and they struggled to cope with a world under constant observation. Schuyler's defense attorneys worked tirelessly to defend her against the accusations. Schuyler's family raised the $50,000 bail, but as a condition of her release, she was required to wear an ankle monitor. She remained confined to her home, avoiding public appearances. Over the course of 12 months, Schuyler's life took a different direction. Her university plans were suspended as she awaited trial for her baby's death. The charges were serious, and the defense filed a motion to move the trial to a different county, but it was denied. Schuyler faced the trial in the original jurisdiction, grappling with the emotional and psychological impact of the allegations and her isolation. Spending time with her dogs provided comfort and companionship as she awaited her trial. Her family stood by her, believing in her innocence and hoping the truth would eventually come out. Despite the difficulties, Schuyler remained determined to fight for her freedom. In July 2019, the state offered a plea deal. If Schuyler pleaded guilty to the remaining charges, they would drop the aggravated murder charge. Schuyler's parents were conflicted about the decision, but after careful thought, Schuyler rejected the plea agreement. This decision frightened her parents, who wondered whether she had made the right choice. But they understood it was her decision, not theirs. Schuyler went on trial on September 3, 2019, for the murder of her newborn baby girl. The prosecution presented as evidence a text message Schuyler had sent to her mother shortly after giving birth, saying she was happy and excited that her belly had returned to its normal size. They argued this demonstrated that Schuyler was relieved to be rid of her baby. The prosecution claimed that Schuyler sent more texts to her mother and boyfriend within 24 hours of the baby's death, expressing her excitement and happiness. They highlighted phrases like, "I'm so excited," and "I feel so much better this morning," as evidence of her guilt. The state believed Schuyler was thrilled about the baby's death and attempted to conceal her guilt. The prosecution also asserted that Schuyler had no intention of keeping her baby and presented evidence that she had searched online for methods to get rid of the baby. They alleged that Schuyler's mother had threatened that her life would be over if she became pregnant, which instilled fear in Schuyler. On the third day of the trial, a doctor testified that the baby's death was a violent homicide, but admitted she could not determine when the baby's skull fractures had occurred. The defense questioned the doctor's conclusions, implying she might have been biased. The defense also criticized the doctor's methods, noting that she did not examine the remains under a microscope or consult with an obstetrician. Another doctor, a fetal medicine specialist, testified that it was unlikely the baby was stillborn, citing Schuyler's admission that she felt the baby moving inside her. The prosecution's case included disturbing evidence, including images of the deceased baby's remains, which visibly affected Schuyler during the trial. Schuyler's response to seeing pictures of her baby's remains was to stare straight ahead, avoiding eye contact. This expressionless behavior contrasted with her emotional reaction the previous day when the judge entered the courtroom. Schuyler's defense attorneys argued that her life had been far from perfect even before the murder accusation. They claimed the prosecution's evidence was incomplete and misleading, and that some of the text messages were taken out of context. They emphasized that Schuyler's frequent use of certain language did not prove that she had killed her daughter. The defense highlighted Schuyler's mental health struggles, particularly her long-standing battle with an eating disorder. They presented evidence of her regular visits to a psychologist and nutritionist, along with photographs showing her varying weights and appearances. They argued that despite her physical condition, Schuyler attempted to comfort and care for the lifeless body after giving birth. Schuyler's attorney explained that she had intended to tell her family about the pregnancy, but never had the opportunity. According to her doctor, she had 8 to 10 weeks before delivery and planned to attend prom and graduate before informing her mother, whom she knew would not be supportive. An obstetrician testified that the baby was stillborn, and Schuyler's description of the baby's appearance suggested it was not a healthy newborn. The doctor noted that Schuyler had gained only 15 pounds during pregnancy, possibly limiting the baby's development due to her eating disorder. The defense sought to cast doubt on Schuyler's statements to the police, suggesting she only said what they wanted to hear. They argued that other factors may have contributed to the baby's death, and that Schuyler had not harmed the baby. Schuyler Richardson's trial lasted 1 week, after which the jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning a verdict. She was acquitted of aggravated murder, involuntary manslaughter, and child endangerment, but convicted of abuse of a corpse, a felony carrying a sentence of up to 1 year in prison. The judge ordered her to remain in jail until her sentencing hearing, which was held the following day. During the sentencing, Schuyler apologized for her actions and acknowledged the harm she had caused. The judge strongly rebuked her for her role in the tragic loss of her baby, stating that if she had made better decisions during her pregnancy, her child would still be alive. The judge sentenced her to 3 years of probation for abuse of a corpse, stressing that her actions were both morally wrong and illegal. In November 2020, a judge granted her request to end her probation 2 years early, recognizing her progress and agreeing that she no longer required supervision. Since her acquittal, Schuyler has taken the opportunity to demonstrate her rehabilitation. She has completed 2 semesters of college and has been working part-time at the law firm that represented her. Although she has faced challenges in finding employment due to her probationary status, Schuyler remains determined to pursue her career goals, including attending law school and becoming a public defender. Moving on to the next case. The case of Cassandra Cantrell. Cassandra and Robert were twins. As children, Cassandra and Robert enjoyed telling each other scary stories in a room with the lights turned off. Robert was a gifted storyteller. Cassandra always thought Robert's stories were interesting. In every story, Robert portrayed a small but courageous man. Additionally, Cassandra and Robert also watched the animated show Scooby-Doo together. Although their mother, Mary Smith, did not share Cassandra's passion for encouraging her children to develop a love of reading, she bought them many books about scary stories. Loving horror stories was the shared passion of the 2 siblings. They even collected villain figurines and, as adults, seriously thought about opening a horror-themed bookstore. Not long afterward, Cassandra's interest in horror movies led her to the studio in 2004. She received a cameo role in a scary movie that, although it did not become popular, still made Robert jealous of Cassandra. Robert began asking Cassandra to make him a deal. Robert asked Cassandra to get him a role in the movie she was filming. Cassandra willingly agreed. Robert was pleased, but he could not act even in a minor role in a soap opera. However, the head of the cast in that movie was Colin Dudley, who had been attracted to Cassandra since her first days in the movie. At the company Halloween celebration, Cassandra dressed as Velma from Scooby-Doo and Colin dressed as Alex from A Clockwork Orange. During the party, Colin spent the entire evening walking around with a glass of milk, glaring at everyone, just like his character in the movie, and he also repeated many quotes from the book. Eventually, he stopped in front of Cassandra and said that her beauty made Colin want to destroy it. Cassandra assumed it was a compliment, and they soon began dating. But their relationship did not last long, only a few months. Colin found another actress named Rebecca and began dating her, after which Colin and Rebecca started living together. One day, on August 25, 2020, Cassandra Connell abruptly disappeared. When her mother, Mary Smith, tried contacting her, she did not respond to the phone. Mary went to report the matter to the police, and a search was quickly initiated. After several days of searching, police discovered her car beneath the bridge. Additionally, the troubling news was that the car was unlocked and the keys were still inside. There was no reason for Cassandra to be here. This location was known as a homeless shelter area, where violence often occurred. Officers had to go around the neighborhood questioning many homeless individuals. But none of them had seen Cassandra, and none of them knew when the car had appeared there. The detective involved in the search for Cassandra asked to trace Cassandra's cell phone. The signal indicated the phone was in the water closest to the bridge, which meant detectives would not be able to retrieve it and could not obtain the information they required. To search more thoroughly, a team of divers was preparing to search the coastal area for Cassandra. Before beginning, they stood on the shore, picked up stones, and threw them into the water to estimate the distance they could throw. Cassandra's mother mentioned that Cassandra's favorite phone case had rhinestones, making it easy to detect. The phone was soon found, but Cassandra's body was not. Mary expressed her sorrow, saying she had been looking forward to becoming a grandmother soon and had not even had time to assemble a crib for her expected grandchild, which was still in its box in the garage. She wondered what she should do with it now, unknowingly giving important information for the investigation. According to statistics, many crimes against pregnant women are committed by their partners. However, Mary Smith did not know who Cassandra's boyfriend was. Cassandra was not married and did not appear to be in a relationship, yet she was pregnant. Mary had no details about him, even though she knew that Cassandra often talked to someone on the phone. However, the phone number had not been saved in Cassandra's contacts, and Mary could not remember the number. It is common for girls to confide in at least one friend about their relationships, especially about something as important as pregnancy. The police located such a friend who stated that Cassandra had reconnected with her ex-boyfriend, Colin Dudley. They had shared a short relationship in 2004, but it was surprising that they renewed their romance 15 years after ending things. When Cassandra learned she was pregnant, she had hesitated to tell Colin. She had remembered a prior conversation where he had expressed his dislike of having children, even saying he felt relieved that his wife Rebecca had been infertile. Worried that a child might harm her relationship with Colin, Cassandra had kept her secret hidden. However, as her pregnancy progressed, it became harder and harder to conceal beneath the oversized clothing. To avoid raising suspicion, Cassandra stopped meeting Colin, even though she knew she could not hide the truth forever. Cassandra decided it was best to be honest with Colin, so she told him over the phone that she was pregnant with his child. Colin was quiet for a moment before responding that he felt happy about the news. Although his tone sounded somewhat strange, Cassandra believed he truly felt happy. A detective went to Colin's home and knocked on the door. However, the person who opened the door was Rebecca, and the detective introduced herself as an old friend of Colin's and asked to see Colin. Without hesitation, Colin stepped out from behind Rebecca, closed the door behind him, and walked out of the house with the detective. It seemed as though Colin had been anticipating this conversation, even though the detective had not yet formally introduced himself. Colin told the detective that he appreciated the detectives for not revealing anything in front of Rebecca. Colin explained that he had heard about Cassandra's disappearance and found it strange, and said that he did not know where she had gone. He explained that Cassandra had mentioned a big argument with her brother, Robert. Colin had advised Cassandra to make peace with Robert, but did not know whether she would take his advice. The detective already knew about the argument between Cassandra and Robert, as Colin had explained to the detective that it had only been a small family misunderstanding, even though Robert had been extremely upset about it. On the day she vanished, Cassandra had called Colin and said she wanted to talk, but he had refused because of his ego. Now, Colin blamed himself for her disappearance, thinking that if he had met her that day, she might not have disappeared. Colin admitted to the detective that he had not been the kindest person, that he had been secretly involved with Cassandra behind Rebecca's back for a long time, and expressed his belief that he would probably be punished for it in the next world. Colin also mentioned that when his father had died in 2014, he had developed a deep hatred for Rebecca. Rebecca often argued with her father Colin, accusing him of not understanding her. However, sometimes it turned out that it was actually Rebecca who did not understand her father. After Colin's father passed away, Colin wanted to fulfill one of his father's wishes. His father had been right about some things, and Colin decided to revive his relationship with Cassandra. This meant Colin had to end his relationship with Rebecca. As a result, for 5 years, Colin lived a double life, which was extremely exhausting. Colin constantly invented excuses to return home late, telling Rebecca about imaginary business trips. Colin even bought a fishing rod, even though he did not like fishing. Colin would tell Rebecca that he was going to the lake when in truth he was meeting Cassandra. To make his lie seem more believable, he bought fish from the supermarket, and Rebecca would cook it despite the fact that the smell of fish made him nauseous. Things changed unexpectedly when Colin learned that Cassandra was pregnant. Colin did not know who the father was, but Cassandra had confided in a close friend that it was Colin. Colin found this difficult to believe. She wanted to have a family of her own with Colin, but this was something Colin could not offer her. Colin assumed she had found someone else, and he assumed that was why Cassandra no longer wanted to see him. The detective asked Colin when the last time was that he had seen her. Colin truthfully replied that he did not remember, but it was probably 3 or 4 months earlier. Colin said that he had run into Cassandra at the mall, but only briefly because Rebecca had been trying on clothes and he had grown tired of waiting, so he walked to the coffee shop. Colin asked the police officer once more whether they had any chance of finding Cassandra alive. The detective replied that they were doing everything possible and asked Colin to believe him. This was not the final time Colin met the detective. Although Cassandra's phone was unusable, police had obtained her call history. It turned out that the person Cassandra had been calling frequently was Colin Dudley. Cassandra had called him often, even on the day she disappeared. Police also received CCTV footage from the railway station near where Cassandra's abandoned car had been located. The footage showed a suspicious man standing out among the passengers on the platform. He was wearing a long coat, gloves, and a scarf covering his face. A wide-brimmed hat hid his eyes, making it impossible for police to clearly see his face. However, the detective observed that the man's gait reminded him of Colin Dudley. The hat was similar to the one Colin had worn at the party while portraying a character from the movie A Clockwork Orange. After tracking the suspect through CCTV, detectives saw him briefly enter a coffee shop, only to leave a few minutes later and walk toward the parking lot. There, he got into his car and drove away. Even though his face was hidden the entire time, detectives were still able to write down the license plate number. A search warrant was then issued, and a unit was sent to Colin Dudley's home. During the search of Colin's residence, detectives hoped that Cassandra was still alive. At first, there was no sign of a murder at Colin's house. However, inside the wardrobe, they found the hat that Colin had attempted to conceal. They then discovered a basement in his house. When the police entered the basement, they did not find Cassandra there, and there was no sign of a crime. However, the dog detected the scent of blood, became distressed, and barked nonstop. Colin insisted he had done nothing illegal, arguing that the police had no evidence and no other suspects, so they were trying to frame him, and he claimed he was an innocent man. Seeking more information, detectives questioned Rebecca, who was stunned by the unexpected search, the accusations against her husband, and the realization that she had been deceived for years. She spoke at length about Colin and her feelings, but when the detective asked whether her husband was capable of murder, she thought for a long time and then replied no. The evidence against Colin was insufficient to send him to prison, which infuriated Robert and Mary Smith. Later, Colin was called in again for questioning. This time, Colin stated that he had an alibi to counter the accusations against him. He said that at 6:30 a.m. on August 25th, he went to a hardware store and bought household cleaning supplies and trash bags. The store's cameras confirmed this, but the purchase of large trash bags raised suspicion. In addition, Colin received a text message from Cassandra, saying that she was coming to his house. Colin immediately deleted the message, but it was still stored in the mobile carrier's system. The police retrieved it from calls and text messages. According to cell phone data, Colin and Cassandra had not left the house for several hours that morning. Colin switched off his phone, but left Cassandra's phone on, possibly by accident. As a result, police were able to follow his movements, including where he appeared on the station's CCTV footage. Police believe Colin may have used the cafe to clean himself after the murder and wash up in the restroom. Colin drove to the location where he had thrown Cassandra's phone, which was the last recorded point of Cassandra's cell signal. The police needed to find Cassandra's body and seize the GPS tracking device on Colin's car to trace his exact route. This device provided new evidence in the case. Following Colin's path from the previous day, the police found a large trash bag tied with a rope in a ravine in the forest. The ground around the bag was stained with blood, and it was clear what was inside. The case had occurred a month earlier, so identifying the body was difficult. However, police were able to identify Cassandra's body thanks to a tattoo described in the search notes. Colin was arrested the same day and charged with murder. Forensic analysis showed that Cassandra's death had been caused by a fractured skull resulting from blunt force trauma. During the trial, the police presented Colin Dudley's motive for committing the crime. However, because there were no witnesses and no physical evidence, including the murder weapon, it was impossible to persuade the jury that Colin was guilty. To conclude the case, the court offered Colin a plea agreement stating that if he pleaded guilty, he would receive a reduced sentence. Colin accepted the agreement and was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Cassandra's mother and brother were deeply saddened by the outcome as they continued to struggle with feelings of guilt for not having met Cassandra before her death. They are especially troubled by the fact that Colin may eventually be released from prison, able to live the rest of his life despite the crimes he committed against their family. Moving on to the next case. The case of Charlene Gallego. Charlene Gallego, originally named Charlene William, was born on October 10, 1956, into a middle-class family, her parents being Mercedes and Charles. As the family's only child, she was consistently pampered by her parents due to their immense love for her. She excelled academically, being an intelligent but shy student, and demonstrated promise as a skilled violinist. However, her life worsened during her teenage years, troubled by substance abuse, drinking, and a gambling habit. By the age of 21, Charlene had experienced 2 marriages and divorces and was managing her own flower and glassware boutique, established with her parents' assistance. She was also continuing her studies at the university. Charlene met Gerald in Sacramento, California, on September 10, 1977, just before her 21st birthday. Gerald, born in July 1946, was 10 years older than Charlene and had a long criminal history. His upbringing had been marked by instability. With his mother employed as a sex worker and involved with multiple abusive partners, while his father, also a career criminal, remained estranged from the family, Gerald grew up in a turbulent environment. His father was eventually executed in Mississippi's gas chamber for killing 2 police officers during a prison escape. Gerald began engaging in criminal activity at a very young age. By 6, he had committed burglary and other sexual offenses. At the age of 12, he was charged with lewd and lascivious acts for assaulting a 6-year-old girl. By the time he met Charlene, Gerald had accumulated 23 arrests and served time in prison for robbery. He had also been convicted of numerous other crimes, including rape, incest, vehicle theft, and assaults with a deadly weapon. Gerald's first marriage occurred when he was 16 to a 21-year-old woman. They had a daughter, Krista, who would later file sexual abuse charges against him in 1978. Gerald went on to marry several more times, though his marriages were short-lived due to his violent and abusive conduct. After meeting Charlene, they quickly formed a bond and moved in together within a week. However, Charlene soon realized Gerald's controlling and manipulative nature. Their sexual relationship initially appeared healthy, but concerns arose when Gerald revealed difficulties in becoming aroused during consensual encounters. He also admitted to having fantasies involving non-consenting partners, which he referred to as sex slaves. To attempt to manage this issue, the couple tried role-playing, but this approach failed to yield the desired results. Eventually, Gerald began devising a plan. At the time of their first murder, Charlene was 2 months pregnant, but she later had an abortion because Gerald did not wish to become a father again. On September 11, 1978, 2 teenagers, 17-year-old Rhonda Sheff and 16-year-old Kaipi Vort, vanished from the Country Club Plaza shopping center in Sacramento. Charlene lured them into their 1973 Dodge van by offering marijuana. The girls entered the rear of the van, where Gerald was waiting. He threatened them with a .25 caliber pistol, bound them, and instructed Charlene to drive toward the Sierra Nevada mountains. As they left the residential area, he told Charlene to stop in a secluded location. He then took the girls individually and sexually assaulted them. After returning to the van, Gerald instructed Charlene to drive to a friend's house to establish an alibi, adding that she should then return using an Oldsmobile. Charlene followed his directions, and upon returning, found Kaipi and Rhonda in the van, who were then forced into the rear of the vehicle. During the drive back to Sacramento, Gerald pulled the car over, attacked both girls, rendered them unconscious with a tire iron, and shot them in the head. Gerald and Charlene left the bodies behind and drove away. Seeking to remain hidden, they temporarily relocated from California to Reno, Nevada. Charlene's parents suggested she use her cousin's birth certificates to help Gerald acquire necessary documents for work. Gerald also obtained a driver's license under the name Stephen Fail. While in Reno, the couple secured regular employment and maintained the appearance of a normal life. They even got married during this period, but the time they refrained from committing crimes was only temporary. On June 24, 1979, Gerald and Charlene attended the Washoe County Fair. 14-year-old Brenda Judd and 13-year-old Sandra Colley were heading home when Charlene approached them as they were leaving the fairgrounds. She asked if they would help her distribute leaflets and promised payment. The girls agreed and followed Charlene to her van to collect more leaflets. Both girls entered the van, and shortly after, Gerald, who had been observing from a distance, approached the vehicle. He was armed and threatened the girls before tying them up. He then instructed Charlene to drive toward I-80, but made a stop at a hardware store first, where he purchased a hammer and a shovel. Charlene then drove the van into the hills. In the back of the van, Brenda and Sandra were assaulted. Similar to their previous crime, Gerald and Charlene parked in a secluded area, letting Brenda and Sandra out one at a time before killing them. Gerald then buried their bodies using the shovel he had bought. The next day, Charlene cleaned the van to remove any forensic evidence left by the victims. Gerald retained the hammer and shovel used, and a few months later, they returned to Sacramento. Upon returning to California, Gerald was eager to find another victim. They selected the Sunrise Mall in Citrus Heights, about 20 minutes outside Sacramento, as their next target. On April 24, 1980, they targeted two 17-year-old girls, Stacy Redican and Karen Twix. Like their previous victims, Stacy and Karen were lured into the back of the van with the promise of drugs. Gerald, armed with a .357 Magnum, threatened and bound them. Afterwards, Stacy and Karen were taken east on I-80 and sexually assaulted during the drive. Gerald instructed Charlene to take them to Limerick Canyon, where both girls were murdered. On their way home, Charlene discarded Gerald's hammer out the window. Around the same time, Charlene became pregnant again. This time, Gerald was pleased with the news, and they decided to keep the child. While on vacation in Oregon on July 7, 1980, Gerald and Charlene committed another crime. While driving on a highway, they encountered 21-year-old Linda Aguila, who was pregnant and walking home from shopping. They offered her a ride, which she accepted. Charlene drove while Gerald sexually assaulted Linda in the back of the van. After finding a stopping point, Charlene exited and wandered around until Gerald finished. In a secluded area, he removed Linda from the van, struck her on the head with a rock, and strangled her to death. Linda's body was discovered later that month in a shallow grave outside Gold Beach. Although a witness saw Linda enter an unidentified van, authorities initially suspected her abusive boyfriend might have been responsible. 9 days later, Gerald and Charlene spent the evening at a sale and bar in West Sacramento. After the bar closed, they waited in the parking lot for the bartender, a young woman named Virginia Muchel, because Gerald was interested in her. When Virginia left work, Gerald forced her into the van at gunpoint. Unlike previous occasions, Gerald and Charlene drove straight home instead of to a remote location. While Gerald sexually assaulted Virginia, Charlene remained inside their house. Afterward, they drove away, and Gerald strangled Virginia. They dumped her body outside Clarksburg, where it was later discovered by law enforcement. Regular customers at the sale-in informed investigators about Gerald and Charlene, who had been there the night before. Authorities were able to track them down, and Gerald admitted that they had been at the bar, but claimed no knowledge of what happened to Virginia. Charlene stated that she and Gerald had gone fishing that day. Investigators discovered fishing line that had been used to tie Virginia's hands. However, this evidence was insufficient to file charges, causing the case to stall. Following this, Gerald became increasingly violent and angry, leading to his separation from Charlene. She then moved in with her parents. During this period, Gerald left town and began a relationship with another woman. By early November, however, he returned to Sacramento and requested to meet Charlene. She agreed, and on November 1st, they borrowed Charlene's parents' Oldsmobile and went to a bar. At the bar, Gerald expressed his desire to find another slave, and they subsequently drove to the Arden Fair shopping center. Charlene was shocked when Gerald exited the vehicle and returned with two university students, Craig Miller and Mary Sowers. They quietly entered the car as Gerald aimed a gun at them. Just as they were about to drive off, a friend of Craig noticed them and inquired about what was happening. Without hesitation, Charlene drove out of her parking spot and sped away. Meanwhile, Craig's friend quickly noted the license plate numbers and reported the situation to the police. Charlene drove Craig and Mary into El Dorado County until Gerald instructed her to stop. He then forced Craig out of the car and shot him 3 times in the head. Upon returning to the Oldsmobile, Gerald had Charlene drive them to his home, where he took Mary into the bedroom and sexually assaulted her. Later, Charlene drove them to a secluded area where Mary was killed. The next day, when Gerald and Charlene returned to Charlene's parents' house, they learned that the police had already been informed. Gerald left Charlene to confront the authorities alone. Charlene told investigators that she and Gerald had gone to a movie in his red Triumph, but investigators learned that the car had not moved all night. She then claimed she could not remember the details because she had been drinking. Meanwhile, Gerald decided he needed to move Craig's body, but it had already been discovered near Bass Lake, California. Likely in a panic, Gerald and Charlene decided to flee the state. They drove to Reno, abandoned their car, and took a bus to Salt Lake City, Utah. Back in Sacramento, Craig's friend identified Gerald from a photograph, and Charlene's parents confirmed the identity of their son-in-law, Gerald. Detectives also discovered that the bullets recovered from Craig's body matched those Gerald had fired into the ceiling at his workplace. In Utah, Charlene contacted her parents for money, and Mercedes and Charles sent her funds. Gerald and Charlene then moved to Denver, Colorado, and later to Omaha, Nebraska, where they again contacted her parents for money. Her parents agreed to assist, but informed the FBI of the situation. The FBI was waiting for the couple at a Western Union office, where they were arrested without incident. Upon being returned to California, both Gerald and Charlene pleaded not guilty. Charlene's lawyers successfully negotiated a plea deal on her behalf. By pleading guilty to the first-degree murders of Craig and Mary and providing testimony against Gerald, she would receive a prison sentence of just 16 years and 1 year. Avoiding the death penalty, Charlene agreed to this arrangement and disclosed all information she had to law enforcement. In Nevada, she also pleaded guilty to the second-degree murders of Karen and Stacy under a similar deal. Although California sought to overturn Charlene's plea bargain due to dissatisfaction with the sentence, the charges related to the murders of Craig and Mary were entirely dropped in 1983. During her testimony, Charlene stated that she participated in the crimes out of fear of Gerald, describing him as violent and abusive. She claimed that he took all the money she earned and manipulated her whenever she expressed dissatisfaction. Meanwhile, Gerald attempted to discredit Charlene by revealing her affair with another man. He also labeled her a drug addict. Gerald took the stand and gave testimony, but numerous inconsistencies were present in his statements. He ultimately urged the jury to trust him, but they were not convinced. As a result, Gerald Gallego was sentenced to death for the murders of Craig Miller and Mary Sowers, which occurred on June 21, 1983. He was also found guilty of the murders of Karen Twiggs and Stacy Redican. While the remains of Brenda and Sandra were discovered in Lassen County, California, he was not tried for those deaths. Gerald maintained his innocence throughout and lived a quiet life in prison until he died of cancer in 2002 at the age of 56, still awaiting execution. In July 1997, Charlene was released from prison. While incarcerated, she gave birth to her son, also named Gerald, who was raised by her parents. Tragically, he later died while serving in the military. After her release, Charlene chose not to return to Sacramento and resumed using her maiden name. She has reportedly returned to the area under the name Mary Martinez and currently works for Charity. Moving on to the next case. The case of Dana Ireland. Dana Marie Ireland was born on December 12, 1968, in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, to John Ireland and Mary Louise Crank. She was the youngest daughter, with an older sister, Sandra, who was 7 years her senior. In 1991, when Dana was 23, she visited her sister in Hawaii with her parents. On December 24th, Dana borrowed her sister's bike for a ride, but never returned. Her bike, a shoe, and a clump of hair were later discovered on the side of the road, yet Dana herself was nowhere to be found. The condition of the bike suggested that Dana had been struck by a vehicle. The impact was severe, causing significant damage to the bike's wheels and steering. Unfortunately, any hope that the driver had taken Dana to a hospital proved futile. Tragically, Dana was found 5 miles from where her bike had been discovered, suffering severe injuries to her body and head, with her lower body exposed. The evidence indicated that Dana had not only been hit by a car, but had also been taken advantage of while in a vulnerable state. Nurse Jerry Gallagher was haunted by a traumatic event that occurred on Christmas Eve 1991. A friend, Brian, arrived at her home on Satellite Road in a rural area 25 miles southeast of Hilo, having found Dana severely injured and in urgent need of medical attention. Gallagher, who was licensed to provide care, accompanied Brian to the scene, just a mile from Dana's house. Upon arrival, she found Dana lying on the ground, naked from the waist down, with severe bruising on the inner sides of her legs. Gallagher attempted to provide first aid using a kit, but Dana's most critical injury was a severe head wound on the back of her skull. When Gallagher asked for her name, Dana's response was incoherent, seemingly uttering the words as land. Gallagher then inquired who was responsible for her condition, but Dana's answers remained unclear. Dana repeatedly requested Gallagher return her keys so she could drive home. Gallagher made efforts to keep her awake while awaiting additional assistance. Due to the lack of phone service in the area, there were significant delays before an ambulance arrived, more than 2 hours after the initial call for help. Further complications arose when the emergency dispatcher relayed the wrong location, collectively causing an additional 34-minute delay before Dana received the medical attention she needed. Gallagher considered driving Dana to the hospital herself, but feared moving her could worsen her injuries. She has since struggled with that decision and the prolonged wait for help. An ambulance finally transported Dana to Hilo Hospital at 7:56 p.m. Unbeknownst to her parents, John and Mary Louise, who were searching for her, Dana was the injured woman being treated at the hospital. They had discovered her damaged bicycle by the side of the road and were trying to locate her. At the time, Mary assumed someone had hit Dana and taken her to the hospital. John stayed near the bike while Mary and their eldest daughter, Sandra, went to the hospital to look for Dana. When the ambulance arrived, Mary and Sandra were already present. Despite the doctor's best efforts, they could not save Dana. She was pronounced dead at 12:25 a.m. due to severe injuries sustained in a motor vehicle accident, including blood loss and trauma to her head, pelvis, and abdomen. Dana's family was shocked by her death, which permanently altered their lives. Over time, they would face another challenge, a long and arduous search for suspects, followed by subsequent trials. The police investigation was described by local newspapers as intensive. Investigators discovered a T-shirt at the crime scene that belonged to the perpetrator. They also seized a sheik from the hospital stained with semen, which was crucial evidence since Dana had semen on her body when admitted. Furthermore, a bite mark on Dana's body matched the teeth imprint of her attacker. Authorities obtained a DNA sample from the perpetrator, but it was of limited use in 1991. The tire tracks from the bike and the secluded location where it was found provided few leads. Despite interviewing residents, investigators could not find any witnesses who had seen the car that hit Dana's bike, likely due to the remote location and poor road conditions, which discouraged frequent traffic. The investigation into the Dana Ireland case had reached a dead end because of the lack of witnesses and evidence. However, a breakthrough occurred when John Gonsalves contacted the Hawaii County Police in May 1994. Gonsalves had been involved in a high-profile case concerning illegal substances, but received a suspended sentence due to his cooperation with authorities. He revealed that his half-brother, Frank Pauline, had crucial information about the Dana Ireland case. Frank Pauline stated that brothers Albert Ian Schweitzer and Sean Schweitzer had been involved in the attack on Dana Ireland. The Schweitzer family lived next door to the Pauline family, and the two families had a history of conflict. According to Frank Pauline, he had been present when the Schweitzers attacked Dana Ireland. They allegedly ran her over, placed her in a trunk, and transported her to another location. Based on Frank Pauline's statements, the police identified Albert Schweitzer, Sean Schweitzer, and Frank Pauline as the main suspects in the case. Frank Pauline Jr. was born on April 27, 1973, in Fremont, California, to Frank Sr. and Patricia Pauline. He grew up in Puna, Hawaii, and became a father of 3 sons by the age of 20. Frank had a history of encounters with the law, beginning at age 9. By February 8, 1983, he had been caught in a burglary. As he grew older, the severity of his crimes increased. In February 1994, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for harassment and robbery. Despite this, Pauline continued committing crimes, earning him the nickname Walking Crime Wave from prosecutors. After being sentenced, Pauline was taken into custody to begin his prison term. However, he managed to escape and was classified as a fugitive. He was eventually recaptured in Honolulu a few days later. 3 months after receiving the 10-year sentence, his brother John Gonsalves contacted authorities and provided information about the Dana Ireland case. Pauline and Gonsalves decided to cooperate with the investigation, which could potentially reduce Pauline's sentence. John Gonsalves was initially considered a questionable source, but after speaking with investigators, the case against him for illegal substances was closed, and he received a suspended sentence. Pauline claimed to possess information regarding the Dana Ireland case and was interrogated by investigators from the Big Island. The 90-minute interrogation took place in Honolulu while Pauline was in custody. During questioning, He provided details about the attack on Dana, Ireland, and reconstructed the crime scene on the Big Island, demonstrating to detectives the locations he had mentioned earlier. Pauline told investigators that on December 24, 1991, brothers Albert Ian and Sean Schweitzer picked him up at his home in a purple Volkswagen Beetle, with Albert Ian driving. Before noticing a woman on the side of the road, they stopped to take illegal substances. As they approached an intersection near Capitol, they saw her standing on the side of the road. Pauline recalled Albert Ian pointing her out, saying, "Look at that girl," but they initially continued driving. Albert Ian then suggested turning the car around so he could speak to her. As they drove back, traveling at 40 to 45 miles per hour, Albert Ian failed to stop in time and accidentally struck her, later identified as Dana, Ireland. After hitting Dana, the three got out of the car, loaded her into the trunk, and continued driving. A short distance later, they stopped and removed Dana from the vehicle. Despite her injuries, she was still alive. Pauline claimed he did not assault Dana, unlike the Schweitzer brothers. However, he admitted to doing something that had severe consequences. According to Pauline, Albert Ian insisted that he find a tire iron and strike Dana on the head to end her suffering. Pauline's initial statement to the police was recorded, and he signed it, confirming that he gave his testimony voluntarily, without coercion, threats, or influence from substances. He was later transferred to the Maui Community Correctional Center for protection due to threats from fellow inmates. However, 2 years later, Pauline retracted his statement, claiming he had fabricated his story at his stepbrother's request to avoid jail. He admitted he was not present during the attack, but had information about those responsible. Pauline explained that he lied about being there to make his information credible and to avoid perjury, though he was not formally charged with perjury. On July 30, 1997, Frank Pauline was charged with the murder of Dana, Ireland, after signing a confession in which he claimed to have struck her with a tire iron. However, the confession raised doubts, as investigators found that when taken to the Big Island, he was unable to identify the precise location of the crime or where Dana's body had been found. This led authorities to question the veracity of Pauline's confession. He eventually retracted it, fearing that continued deception could result in perjury charges. His retraction was partly motivated by the realization that his half-brother, Albert Gonzalez, was innocent and being wrongly accused. In the end, Gonzalez avoided major charges related to a separate crime and agreed to testify against Pauline at his trial. At the time of the arrest, DNA testing technology was not as advanced as it is today. Nevertheless, authorities collected DNA samples from Pauline and the Schweitzer brothers. They also analyzed biological fluids from the gurney sheet used to transport Dana, Ireland, to the hospital, as well as swabs from her body. However, the results were unexpected. The DNA of Frank Pauline and the Schweitzer brothers did not match the perpetrator's DNA. Although charges against the three men were dropped, the investigation continued. The prosecution suggested that another individual must have been involved, as other evidence also failed to implicate Pauline and the Schweitzer brothers. For example, the teeth of the Schweitzer brothers and Pauline did not match the bite mark found on Dana's chest. Furthermore, no traces of Dana, Ireland's blood or hair were discovered in Albert Ian Schweitzer's Volkswagen, which he had acquired only a month after her death. External pressures, including those from the Ireland family, the public, and the press, may have influenced the direction of the investigation into Dana's death. Albert Ian Schweitzer was 20 years old at the time of Dana, Ireland's murder, and had only traffic-related infractions on his record. Sean Schweitzer, who was 16 when Dana, Ireland died, faced charges in connection with her death at the age of 23. Around the same time, Sean also faced unrelated charges of fourth-degree assault for inappropriately touching a 15-year-old girl when he was 16. He received a sentence of 180 days in prison and 1 year of probation. Despite their records showing a pattern of questionable behavior, DNA testing cleared all three suspects in the Dana, Ireland case of her murder. However, this finding was likely overshadowed by the unrelated convictions in their pasts. 5 days after Frank Pauline's initial statement to the police, investigators searched the Schweitzer family home and seized Albert Ian's 1957 Volkswagen Beetle as evidence. Both Sean and Albert Ian claimed they were not with Frank Pauline on the night of the crime, though they admitted to knowing him. Sean stated that he was at home on Christmas Eve, while Albert Ian said he was either at home or at his uncle's house. Albert Ian also explained how he had acquired the car, initially denying that he had performed any bodywork on it. He revealed that the car had originally been purple but was repainted yellow because it was not his preferred color. The Schweitzer brothers believed that Frank Pauline had falsely accused them due to a long-standing feud between their families. Nevertheless, the prosecution continued to pursue the case. On May 5, 1999, just days before the statute of limitations expired for some of the crimes committed against Dana Ireland, police received a statement from Michael Ortiz, a cellmate of the Schweitzers and an associate of Gonzalez. This new information was seen as a potential breakthrough in the case. During questioning by authorities, Michael Ortiz claimed that Albert Ian Schweitzer had confessed to his involvement in the crime. Based on this testimony, Frank Pauline and the Schweitzer brothers were recharged in connection with Dana Ireland's death just 2 weeks later. This development fueled public suspicion and distrust, as the information came from a questionable source and emerged just days before the statute of limitations was set to expire. Frank Pauline was the first to face trial. The proceedings were highly emotional. Pauline maintained his innocence, insisting that he had lied when he initially confessed to involvement in Dana's murder. While taking the stand, Mary Ireland recounted receiving the devastating news about her daughter. She described the distressing scene: a bicycle on the road, a shoe, and a lock of hair. However, the witnesses linking Pauline to the crime had checkered pasts and stood to benefit from implicating him. Among those who gained from Pauline being found guilty was his half-brother, Gonzalez, who became a witness for the prosecution. Witness William Chung, who also testified against Pauline, stated that Pauline had confessed to the crime. Yet, when asked if he recognized Pauline in the courtroom, he pointed to another person, even though Frank Pauline was present. The jury also viewed Dana Ireland's bike, shorts, top, underwear, and a Jimmy's t-shirt recovered from the scene. None of these items contained DNA from Pauline or the Schweitzers. To address the lack of scientific evidence, Deputy Prosecutor Lincoln Ashida insisted that the Jimmy's t-shirt, covered in Dana Ireland's blood, belonged to Pauline. "We're not afraid of that evidence. We embrace it," Ashida said. That same DNA technology works both ways for the defense and the prosecution. Pauline's lawyer protested, arguing that the t-shirt was not even Frank's size. Nevertheless, the jury determined that the evidence and assumptions presented at trial were sufficient to convict Pauline. He was found guilty and sentenced to 180 years in prison, despite forensic evidence demonstrating that his confession was false. The next trial was that of Albert Ian Schweitzer, who was aware of Pauline's sentence and was surprised when prosecutors offered him a plea deal given the lack of physical evidence. Albert Ian Schweitzer rejected the offer, maintaining his innocence. The prosecutor argued that Schweitzer's Volkswagen Beetle had been involved in the crime, but several facts contradicted this claim. Witnesses near the location where Dana was found reported seeing a pickup truck, not the Beetle, and forensic analysis of Schweitzer's car revealed no evidence linking it to the crime. Additionally, Schweitzer had only become the official owner of the Volkswagen in January 1992. Albert Ian Schweitzer was sentenced to 130 years in prison, based on the testimony of Michael Ortiz, who claimed that Albert Ian had confessed to the crime, and on evidence of scratches on the car's bumper. After seeing his brother convicted, Sean Schweitzer initially sought to prove his innocence, but ultimately chose to accept a plea deal due to concerns that the justice system might fail him again. As part of his agreement with the prosecutor's office, Sean Schweitzer was required to testify against his brother and Frank Pauline, who were accused of involvement in Dana Ireland's death. He was also required to take a polygraph test to verify his honesty. The test was administered on March 24, 2000, by an examiner from the State Attorney General's office. However, the results indicated that Sean was not truthful regarding his involvement in the crime. Despite this, he was still allowed to plead guilty to lesser charges of kidnapping and involuntary deprivation of life. Court records contained discrepancies concerning the polygraph results. Deputy Prosecutor Lincoln Ashida initially stated that Sean had failed the test, but later claimed he had passed it. Sean was ultimately sentenced to 5 years probation, with credit for 18 months already served. In a post-release interview, Sean stated that the decision to accept the plea deal had been made by his family, who were concerned about the potential impact on his parents if both brothers were imprisoned. His brother, Albert Ian, later sentenced to 130 years in prison, recalled advising Sean to accept the deal to avoid serving life in prison, as incarceration of both brothers might have placed undue stress on their parents. Years later, Sean remains remorseful for testifying against his brother and accepting the prosecutor's deal. He and his family have struggled to move on from the case, and Sean has had difficulty securing employment due to the community's knowledge of the matter. Community members discussed the case for years, contributing to Sean's feelings of disappointment and frustration. After being wrongfully convicted, Albert Ian Schweitzer and his family refused to give up the fight. In 2005, Albert Ian applied to the Innocence Project, an organization dedicated to re-examining convictions using new evidence and investigative techniques. The case gained renewed momentum in 2010 when students, lawyers, and professors from the University of Hawaii began reviewing the old files from the Dana Ireland case. Local prosecutors authorized the reinvestigation, which continued over several years. Throughout this process, efforts focused on achieving the intended goal, justice for Albert Ian. The aim was to rectify a miscarriage of justice and secure restitution. The investigation's findings and subsequent actions were intended to bring truth and closure. Ultimately, the hope was that justice would prevail and the matter would be resolved. Years later, Mary Louise Ireland, Dana's mother, passed away on her 92nd birthday in 2016. Meanwhile, Linda battled breast cancer, making it difficult for her to visit her son, Albert Ian. When she finally had the opportunity to see him for the last time, she was heartbroken. During this emotionally charged visit, Albert Ian expressed a final wish to his mother. He did not want her to leave, and the thought of saying goodbye was unbearable. He had always found it difficult to see loved ones depart, especially after losing his grandmother. Albert Ian confided in his mother that his greatest fear was losing those closest to him, and that he never wanted to face saying goodbye to her again. At the trial, DNA expert Nancy Din testified after retesting evidence using advanced methods that were unavailable during the original trials. She explained that technology had improved significantly since 2000, enabling the detection of details that were previously invisible. This contradicted the 2000 authorities' claim that Frank Pauline's and the Schweitzer brothers' DNA was absent from the T-shirt due to the excessive presence of Dana Ireland's blood. Scientists from the Innocence Project employed modern technology to distinguish between Dana's DNA and other DNA present on the T-shirt. They also identified seminal fluid and sweat from the armpit on the garment. Nancy Din confirmed that the DNA found on the T-shirt and Dana's body belonged to the same individual. However, she stated that this person was neither Frank Pauline nor any of the Schweitzer brothers. Following her testimony, a tire tread expert remotely testified that the tire tracks found at both crime scenes could not have been made by the Schweitzer brothers' Volkswagen. In his opinion, the tracks were likely left by a larger vehicle, such as a truck, SUV, or van. The final witness to testify was dentist Adam Freeman. According to the prosecutor's initial assessment, Dana Ireland had a human bite mark on her left breast. However, Freeman disputed this claim, stating it was not a bite mark. This case underscored the flaws in forensic science, particularly in bite mark analysis. After all witnesses concluded their testimony, District Court Judge Peter Kubota delivered his verdict. He stated that the new DNA evidence, combined with the tire tread evidence, the disputed bite mark evidence, and Sean Schweitzer's recantation, collectively demonstrated that a jury in a new trial would likely find Albert Ian Schweitzer not guilty. Therefore, Kubota vacated the conviction and ordered Albert Ian Schweitzer's immediate release. With these words, spoken 23 years after his guilty verdict and 25 years after his arrest, Albert Ian was suddenly exonerated and freed. Judge Kubota then addressed him with heartfelt remarks. With 1/3 of his life still ahead, the judge offered Albert Ian a choice: to live in anger and resentment toward the process and those who had wronged him, or to embrace a newfound sense of freedom. Kubota encouraged him to make the most of this opportunity, surrounded by the family who had come to support him. Freed from his handcuffs, Albert Ian hugged his lawyers and then his family members, including some he had not seen in decades. His mother was overcome with emotion in his arms. Albert Ian's young son, who had grown up without him, was also present in the courtroom and shared a hug with his father. His younger brother, Sean, was there as well, offering a warm smile and open arms. As a result of Albert Ian's acquittal, Sean's lawyer is now seeking to have Sean's own criminal record cleared. The story serves as a reminder of the tragic fate of Frank Pauline, who died in prison in New Mexico in 2015. Pauline was attacked by a fellow inmate, Daniel Hood, who was serving time for taking 2 lives. On April 27, 2015, Hood assaulted Pauline in the recreation yard at the Southern New Mexico Correctional Facility, striking him 3 times on the back of the head with a rock. The motive for the attack stemmed from Hood's belief that Pauline was a snitch. Despite the efforts of medical staff, Pauline could not be saved. In response, his family's lawyer plans to file a petition for his posthumous rehabilitation. Albert Ian Schweitzer finds the transition from prison life to freedom extremely difficult. He shares that adjusting to life outside of prison has been far more challenging than he anticipated. Most days are a struggle with anxiety. While Albert Ian may be eligible for compensation for wrongful imprisonment, potentially awarding him $50,000 for each year he spent in prison, the process is not straightforward. His lawyers are working diligently to ensure he receives the compensation he is owed. The Dana Ireland case remains unsolved 3 decades later, but investigators remain hopeful that advances in DNA testing and genealogy will eventually help identify the person responsible for destroying the Dana family's life. Moving on to the next case. The case of Diane Hollick. Diane Hollick, a 43-year-old senior executive at IBM, was recognized for her reliability. Therefore, when she missed a scheduled work call on the morning of November 16, 2001, her colleagues were immediately alarmed. Unable to reach her, they contacted the police, requesting that officers check on her at home. The discovery made by the officer at her house was gruesome. Born in 1958 in New York City, Diane was an ambitious individual who had built a successful career at IBM, one of the largest hardware and software companies in the world. Over 2 decades, her dedication had earned her a senior position, allowing her to work from her home office in Austin, Texas, where she had relocated in 1996. Diane led a luxurious life in the suburbs, hosting wine-tasting gatherings, frequenting high-end restaurants and dance clubs, and participating in charity work. She was also attempting to enhance her personal life. In mid-November 2001, a severe storm warning was in effect in Texas, bringing heavy rains and tornadoes to Austin. On the morning of November 16th, Diane worked from home, but her company had scheduled a work call. Despite having several phones, including her home line, she stopped answering all of them. Her colleagues left messages asking her to return their calls and grew increasingly concerned when she failed to respond. They reached out to the police department and requested that someone be sent to Diane's residence to check on her well-being. Upon arrival, Diane's neighbor, who had a spare key, noticed the officer's presence. The police entered the house, encountering complete silence, broken only by the sound of dogs coming from the kitchen. Receiving no response from Diane, they began searching the home. On the second-floor bedroom, they made the grim discovery of Diane Hollick's lifeless body. Diane's home was among the cleanest crime scenes detectives had ever seen. Her body, fully dressed, was positioned next to the bed in the bedroom. Strangulation marks on her neck resembling those caused by a rope, along with signs of her wrists being bound with cable ties, indicated that a crime had occurred. The absence of theft, struggle, or forced entry led investigators to believe that Diane's murderer was someone she knew and trusted. There was no evidence of sexual assault before her death, but dark spots and red stains on the carpet near the bedroom entrance suggested a potential struggle. One irregularity in the otherwise orderly home drew the detective's attention. A towel placed on the back of the living room sofa appeared out of place. It was sent to a laboratory for examination, in the hope that it might yield an important clue. The police interviewed those who knew Diane and determined that she had no known enemies, although it remained possible that unknown enemies existed. During the investigation, it was revealed that Diane was in a romantic relationship with Dennis Conley, the man she wished to spend her life with. This was not her first marriage, as her previous marriage had ended quickly. Diane and Dennis had met through a dating service, and he had 2 children from a prior marriage. Dennis was a businessman living in Houston, approximately 150 miles from Austin, where Diane resided. Despite the distance and infrequent meetings, they became close quickly, and after 2 months of communicating, Dennis proposed to Diane, presenting her with a $17,500 platinum ring. She accepted his proposal. According to Diane's close friends, her relationship with Dennis had recently begun to deteriorate. As an independent woman focused on advancing her career, Diane felt uneasy with Dennis' occasional attempts to control her. Another concern was the decision to relocate to Houston. The couple had decided to begin their life together in his hometown, so Diane put her suburban Austin home up for sale. However, realtors struggled to find a buyer willing to meet the $435,000 asking price for the property. Detectives investigated whether Dennis was involved in Diane's death, requesting that he come to the police station for a voluntary conversation without an attorney. Dennis agreed and spoke openly with the detectives. The medical examiner's report indicated that Diane died between 3 p.m. on November 15th and 3 a.m. on November 16th. A peculiar detail drew their attention. Diane's wedding ring, given to her by Dennis, was missing from her finger, while her other jewelry in the bedroom remained untouched. This suggested that the killer had a personal motive or deliberately removed the ring to mislead the investigation. Dennis presented himself as a grieving individual. The detectives asked him about his relationship with Diane and his whereabouts on the day of her death and the day her body was discovered. According to Dennis, he was in Houston at the time, stating he last spoke with Diane on the morning of November 15th. He spent the entire day at work without contacting her again the next morning. When he could not reach her, he left a voicemail unaware of her death. Dennis admitted that their relationship was troubled, revealing recent arguments before concluding the conversation. The police collected his fingerprints and a DNA sample, but it was possible he could have traveled to Austin, interacted with Diane, and returned to Houston by the following morning. However, after verifying his alibi, the detectives confirmed he had not left the city, so they needed to pursue another suspect. Before leaving the police station, Dennis provided a crucial lead that shifted the direction of the investigation, pointing out that Rye, one of Diane's co-workers, had displayed an unusual interest in her. The detectives examined this and discovered that Rye often visited Diane's home and sometimes walked her dogs, but he had a solid alibi, excluding him as a suspect. When speaking with Diane's colleagues, authorities learned that a mysterious individual had inspected her house a few days prior to her death. He claimed he would make a cash offer if he liked the property and planned to return with his wife in a few days to make a joint decision on the purchase. As this was one of the few leads the police had, they concentrated all their efforts on identifying this unknown buyer, hoping someone might have seen him during his visit to Diane's house. The detectives decided to investigate the owners of properties for sale in Diane's neighborhood, suspecting that the mysterious buyer might have viewed more than just the victim's house. They conducted interviews with the homeowners and discovered that 7 women had experienced a similar encounter. A man, aged between 35 and 45, with a prominent nose and dark hair combed back, had visited their homes on the day of Diane's death without a real estate agent present. While 6 women had refused him entry, 1 woman had permitted him inside. According to her, the man's behavior became unusual after entering the house. He showed no interest in the rooms or doors and only requested to see the second-floor bedroom. She felt something was wrong and asked him to leave. Notably, he had introduced himself as Walter Miller when requesting permission to view the property. The police searched their databases for the name Walter Miller in Austin, but found 2 individuals with that name, neither of whom matched the age or physical description of the suspect. As detectives examined the motive behind the crime, they questioned why the thief had only taken the wedding ring and whether other jewelry or cash might have been stolen, considering the victim's wealth and history of living alone, which made it impossible to determine the full extent of her jewelry collection. They also questioned the significance of the perpetrator removing the cable ties that had bound Diane's hands and taking them. Did he know her personally? The autopsy revealed no signs of sexual assault prior to Diane's death, and her body was found fully clothed. Despite this, the detectives returned to her home to search for any traces of semen, assuming the perpetrator might have left evidence behind. However, their search produced nothing. A composite sketch of a potential suspect was broadcast on evening news programs, urging anyone with information about a similar individual to come forward. One of the few leads available to investigators was a few strands of hair found on a towel at Diane's residence. Although the hair lacked roots, preventing a complete DNA analysis, detectives remained hopeful that a partial DNA profile could still provide results. A woman contacted the police after seeing the composite sketch, believing it resembled a suspect in the Diane Hollick case. During her interview with detectives, she recounted how she and her husband had listed their house for sale 6 months earlier. A man had arrived, claiming he wanted to purchase the property with cash, but needed to view it first. Since no real estate agent was present, she refused to let the stranger inside. 2 months later, the same man returned to her doorstep, introducing himself as Jim Taylor. With her husband away at work and only her young daughter present, the man again requested entry to the house. When she denied him, he became agitated, shouting and insisting that he be allowed inside. The woman threatened to call the police, prompting the would-be buyer to leave. Still shaken, she wrote down the man's name and the license plate number of his minivan, which had been parked in her driveway. When she saw the suspect's portrait on the news, she immediately recognized him as the same person who had visited her house some time earlier. This new information prompted the police to obtain the license plate number, which they then used to identify the vehicle's owner through their database. However, the owner's name was not Jim Taylor, as initially suspected, but rather Patrick Anthony Russo. At first, it seemed improbable that Russo was involved in Diane's death. He appeared to be a family man, living 40 minutes from Austin with his wife and 2 children, and even played in a local church music band. But as the police delved deeper into his past, they discovered a more sinister history. Russo was a former convict who had served time for a series of attacks on women. One of these attacks had escalated to abduction, in which he had bound his victim with cable ties and attempted to strangle her, stopping only at the last moment. For this crime, he had been sentenced to 20 years in prison. While serving his sentence, Anthony Russo met his future wife, Janet, a volunteer at the prison's church program. Despite his extensive criminal record, Russo was granted parole after serving 8 years of his 20-year sentence. The police were skeptical of the coincidence, so they obtained a search warrant for Anthony Russo's residence. When the police arrived, Anthony answered the door, but they found no incriminating evidence inside his home, including Diane's ring or any other personal belongings. A subsequent search of his minivan also produced nothing. However, neighbors reported seeing a similar vehicle parked outside Diane's house on the day of her murder. Significantly, the police discovered several cable ties in the utility room that matched the ones that had left marks on Diane's wrists. Although these ties could be considered evidence, it remained indirect because anyone could purchase them at a hardware store. The investigator informed Anthony that his name had come up during an investigation and requested that he come to the station for a more detailed conversation. At the station, investigators asked Russo about his whereabouts on November 15th and 16th. Russo explained that on Thursday the 15th, he traveled to Austin to visit a religious radio station but was unable to enter because no one answered the door. Coincidentally, this radio station was located near Diane Hollick's house. According to Russo, he headed home around 4 p.m. but became slightly lost due to a hurricane, which delayed his arrival until around 6 p.m. When the police questioned Russo about any intentions to purchase a house, he claimed he had never viewed any properties for sale. This response proved pivotal, as it would later have major consequences. Upon being shown a photograph of Diane, Russo remained expressionless and denied ever having met her. Although the police could not find any evidence linking Russo to the crime, they were forced to release him. However, the following day, detectives visited the radio station Russo had mentioned and uncovered evidence that his prior statement about the closed doors was false. The employees at the station revealed that the doors had not been closed, as a large crowd had gathered in the lobby due to an approaching tornado. Meanwhile, a second woman approached the police after encountering a man who resembled the suspect's sketch while attempting to sell her house. When the stranger came to her door with a pamphlet featuring local house listings, including her own, she allowed him inside to view the property under the pretense that he would make a cash offer. However, when she showed him a bedroom, he tried to attack her but retreated quickly upon hearing her child cry in the adjacent room. The quick-thinking woman kept the pamphlet, which contained a crucial fingerprint later matched by the police to Anthony Russo. Russo's claim of never having looked at houses for sale was therefore discredited, and his false statement constituted a misdemeanor, violating his probation. Russo's arrest was prompted by his failure to meet parole conditions. Fearing he might flee while evidence linking him to Diane's death was collected, authorities deemed it necessary to detain him. The police located 15 women who had allowed Russo to view their homes. All of these women were later brought in to identify the suspect. In a lineup, the women saw 5 men, including Anthony Russo, all dressed similarly and with similar appearances. Each of the men repeated the phrase, "You have a beautiful house," in turn. 10 of the 15 women identified Anthony Russo as the man who had viewed their homes prior to purchase. The remaining 5 women were unable to make a positive identification. When the police questioned Russo again, he knew he had been caught lying. Despite this, he continued to assert his innocence. At one point, he requested to see his wife and then refused to answer further questions. The detectives soon received a report from the laboratory confirming that the mitochondrial sequence of the hair found on the towel at Diane's house matched Anthony Russo's DNA. While this was a significant finding, it was not conclusive, as there was a small chance, 1 in 12,900,000, according to court documents, that the hair could have belonged to someone else. Although the investigation had gathered substantial circumstantial evidence, there was no single piece of direct evidence linking Russo to Diane Hollick's death. Another piece of circumstantial evidence was the report of his cell phone location, which placed Russo in the same area where Diane lived on the day of her death. After examining the computer seized from his home, experts discovered a disturbing search history. Russo, a 37-year-old father of 2 and regular churchgoer, frequently visited an adult website. On this site, he watched videos and read articles about strangulation during intimate encounters. Notably, access to these materials required payment. Even more alarming was the discovery that just days before Diane's death, Russo had read a story about a man who posed as a buyer to enter a lonely woman's home, strangled her, and then stole valuables, making it appear to be a robbery in order to conceal his true motive of satisfying a desire for strangulation. Detectives conducted a thorough investigation into Russo and his wife's financial situation. Despite having only $2,000 in savings, Russo claimed to be in the market for a new home, raising suspicions. Furthermore, the couple had yet to pay off the mortgage on their current residence, although there was no concrete evidence proving this. On February 5, 2004, more than 2 years after Diane Hollick's death, police arrested Anthony Russo on suspicion of her murder. During his trial, 14 women testified under oath that Russo had approached them about purchasing a house. Several of these women reported that Russo had visited them on the day of Diane's death, though they refused to let him into their homes. One woman, however, initially allowed him inside before asking him to leave due to his unusual behavior. Notably, all the women Russo targeted were of a similar age, suggesting he had been observing them before making his move. Russo appeared to have a specific type of woman in mind. The prosecution presented the evidence again, describing the events of that fateful November day. As previously stated, Diane informed a colleague that a potential buyer had come to view the house. Prosecutors suggested that Russo discovered Diane lived alone when he first visited the house on November 15th. He toured several homes for sale, but only one woman, Diane, permitted him inside. On his return to Diane's house, Russo likely asked to see the property again, this time with a sinister motive, carefully planning his actions to avoid leaving evidence. On the rainy day, Diane unexpectedly offered him a towel to dry his hands and face, which he carelessly discarded on the back of the sofa. As she showed him the house again, Russo attacked her on the second floor. Prosecutors believed Russo derived pleasure from strangling, ultimately causing Diane's death during their second encounter. Before leaving, Russo took cable ties and Diane's wedding ring, which the police were unable to recover. He locked the door using a spare key kept at the front entrance. Russo's former and current wives testified in court, both claiming that Anthony Russo took pleasure in strangulation. It is notable that this was not his first offense, as he had a prior conviction for a similar crime. After deliberating for 11 hours, the jury found Patrick Anthony Russo guilty, and the court sentenced him to life in prison. Despite his history of criminal behavior, Russo never admitted his guilt. He will become eligible for parole again and can submit his first parole petition in 2044, at which time he will be over 80 years old. Moving on to the next case. The case of Joseph Doss. Joseph Doss was born on April 13, 1945, into a poor Catholic family in St. Trudeau, Belgium. As a child, he enjoyed studying languages and religion. After completing his military service, he moved to France in 1964. In 1967, Joseph converted to Protestantism and later went to Switzerland to study for the pastorate. From 1970 to 1974, he served in parishes in Lens and Bethune. Unlike many others of the time, particularly those in religious roles, Joseph was aware that he was gay and accepted it. He sought to better understand his feelings and to learn about the LGBTQ community. This interest led him to study psychology and sexology with the aim of eventually establishing a center to support sexual minorities. Between 1974 and 1976, Joseph conducted research on the pastoral and psychological needs of sexual minorities at the Free University of Amsterdam, with partial financial support from a church grant. After completing his studies, Joseph moved to Paris and established the Centre to Christ Libertar, CCL, inside a theater that primarily screened pornographic films. This location was chosen due to the cultural attitudes of the time, which marginalized the LGBTQ+ community and limited Joseph's options for setting up his center. At the CCL, Joseph connected with wealthy and professional individuals who helped him relocate the center to a better facility. The CCL published a small magazine titled He Liberates. He loved and created a publishing branch that produced numerous books on complex topics, including transgender issues, sadomasochism, and controversial subjects such as pedophilia. Joseph performed blessing ceremonies for all couples, which made him and the CCL a controversial topic at the time. In 1982, Joseph became a French citizen and, together with the CCL, helped establish the International Gay Association. Through his broad network of supporters, he learned about the AIDS outbreak and became one of the first educators on the subject in Paris. In the late 1980s, he and his partner, Guy Bonda, opened a bookstore in the city center that offered literature in multiple languages, often addressing sensitive issues and presenting diverse perspectives. A bookstore employee recalled an incident in which a large stone was thrown through the door's window, perceived as a warning. On July 19, 1990, around 9 p.m., two men claiming to be police officers knocked on Joseph's door. They requested that he accompany them and assured Guy that Joseph would return in about 30 minutes. However, Joseph never came back home. After 24 hours without news, Guy contacted the authorities and days later officially reported Joseph missing, stating that he had been taken by men posing as police. 3 months later, a mushroom hunter discovered Joseph's remains in the Ramelet Forest, located 16 miles southwest of Paris. The body was so decomposed that it was nearly unrecognizable. An autopsy indicated that Joseph had likely been strangled just hours after his last sighting by Guy. Joseph's murder remains unsolved and has generated significant speculation. At the time, there were rumors suggesting that Joseph had been killed because he possessed information about high-ranking officials involved in pedophilia. It was later revealed that he had been under surveillance by the DCRG, the intelligence agency in France during that period. The DCRG believed that Joseph was operating a pedophile ring from his bookshop, as he hosted a support group for pedophiles every Sunday evening. The primary suspect in Joseph's case is Jean-Marc Dufour, an officer from the DCRG responsible for the surveillance. After Joseph's body was discovered, he and his 4 team members were questioned. Guy identified Jean-Marc as a man who had visited their home in June 1990. At that time, he and another individual appeared to be intoxicated, behaved inappropriately, and made a great deal of noise. They also continuously knocked on Joseph's door on the night he disappeared. Although Jean-Marc and his team were nearby meeting with an informant, investigators could not establish any evidence linking them to Joseph's disappearance. There is speculation that the group intended to intimidate Joseph, but the situation escalated beyond control. However, no evidence has clarified what happened to Joseph in 1991. Jean-Marc was dismissed from the DCRG after he angrily fired shots at the door of an informant, a gay man and illustrator he had previously tried to recruit for the CCL. 7 years later, 2 senior police officials faced trial for wiretapping Joseph's phone from July 12 to July 30, 1990. In 2007, Joseph's case was officially closed, leaving his murder unresolved. Moving on to the next case. The case of Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coney. This story began in 2016 in the Argentine city of Mendoza. On January 10th, 2 young women, 21-year-old Marina Menegazzo and 22-year-old Maria Jose Coney, set out on a highly anticipated trip. Unfortunately, their journey would later become the center of one of the most publicized investigations in Latin America over the past decade. At the time, Maria Jose was a 22-year-old economics student at the National University of Cuyo, while Marina was a 21-year-old speech therapy student at the Aconcagua University. Both women volunteered with an organization that assisted homeless individuals. According to friends and acquaintances, they were bright and cheerful young women who were extremely close to their families. Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coney initially traveled with two friends, but the group eventually separated. The two women continued their journey, which began on January 10th. Their route can be traced through Maria Jose Coney's Instagram posts. On January 13th, they were in Cusco, Peru, an ancient city that once served as the capital of the Inca Empire. The following day, January 14th, another photo was posted, also taken in Cusco. A subsequent image, posted on January 15th, showed them on a railway bridge near the Machu Picchu hydroelectric power plant. Machu Picchu is a renowned ancient Inca city, often called the city above the clouds, and is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Maria Jose Coney and Marina Menegazzo had approximately 10 days of vacation remaining and were in no rush to return home. They decided to revisit Montañita, the town in Ecuador where their trip had originally begun. On February 22nd, Maria Jose Coney posted a photo of herself with Marina Menegazzo on Instagram, which would be her last post. On the same day, they contacted their families in Argentina to inform them that they would be returning soon. Their plan was to take a bus from Ecuador to Lima, Peru, where they would spend the night at a friend's house. From Lima, they intended to fly to Santiago, Chile, on February 25th, and then take a bus to their hometown of Mendoza, Argentina. They informed their relatives that they would be unreachable by phone for a few days due to poor signal reception. However, when their families attempted to contact them, they were unable to reach them. As the days passed, no activity appeared on Maria Jose Coney and Marina Menegazzo's social media accounts, causing their relatives to become increasingly worried. Marina Menegazzo's sister turned to social media to raise awareness about their disappearance. She posted a photo of the girls with a message stating that they had gone missing on Monday, February 22nd, in Montañita, Ecuador, and asked people to share the information. The families were eager to learn whether the women had left the country and boarded a flight, but their inquiries to the airline received no response. The families also attempted to contact the friends with whom the women were supposed to stay before leaving, but the friends claimed the women never arrived. Subsequently, the families reported their disappearance to the emergency services in Ecuador and contacted the Argentine consulate for assistance. The Argentine consulate became involved on February 27th and sent fingerprints to Ecuador. This action was prompted by the discovery, a few days earlier on February 25th, of an unidentified woman's body in Montañita, which had been transported to Guayaquil. Authorities compared the fingerprints from Argentina with those of the unidentified body and confirmed that it was Maria Jose Coney. On Saturday, February 27th, police investigated the area where Maria Jose Coney's body had been found and located Marina Menegazzo's body just 43 yards away. Like Maria Jose Coney, Marina Menegazzo's body was wrapped in a plastic bag and secured with duct tape. According to Ecuadorian police, the perpetrator had attempted to conceal Marina Menegazzo's body by placing an object on top of it, which initially delayed its discovery. During the autopsy, the medical examiner determined that Maria Jose Coney's death was caused by severe blunt force trauma to the head. Her injuries also included a broken leg, a broken toe, and what authorities described as genital trauma. Additionally, markings on her wrists suggested that she had been restrained. Marina Menegazzo died from 6 stab wounds to the neck and exhibited similar wrist markings, indicating she had also been tied up. The deaths occurred on February 23rd. Toxicology tests revealed that both women's blood contained a high concentration of psychiatric medication. Based on the circumstances, police believe that the medication was administered without their knowledge and that they may not have been aware they had ingested it. It is likely that someone had mixed the medication into their food or drinks without their consent. A breakthrough in the case occurred just 24 hours after the discovery of the second body. The President and Interior Minister of Ecuador announced that the police had made an arrest, eliciting mixed emotions among the victims' families. Alberto Segundo Minapon, 33, and Norilio Eduardo Rodriguez, 39, were taken into custody and quickly confessed to the crime, revealing details of the events. Physical evidence recovered from Minapon's residence included blood stains. Police also recovered Marina Menegazzo's phone, backpack, and other personal belongings near the house. The rapid arrests and immediate confessions of the men were met with skepticism by observers of the case, leaving many questions unanswered. Ecuador's Minister of the Interior, José Serrano, stated that the men had checked out of their hotel room on February 22 at 2 p.m. According to the men's account, their money had been stolen at the hotel, prompting them to hitchhike to Lima. However, the hotel owner disputed this claim, stating there was no evidence of theft. Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coni's families found this explanation difficult to accept, particularly because the women had credit cards they could have used if they had encountered financial difficulties. The inactivity on the cards suggested either that both cash and cards were taken or that the men's story was not accurate. Furthermore, the perpetrators could have accessed the funds in the accounts without the physical cards, yet they did not use the money to book travel or accommodations online. According to Ecuador's Minister of the Interior, Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coni had entered a bar and requested 2 glasses of water because they were thirsty and had no money. The bar owner corroborated this account, stating that she had provided the women with water due to their financial situation. However, it remains unclear whether any money had actually been stolen. The minister went on to reference the testimony of the suspects, who had already confessed to the crime. One of the suspects, Pon, stated that around 8 p.m. on that day, Rodriguez informed him about 2 Argentinian girls in a bar. Pon and Rodriguez approached them and began a conversation, during which Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coni explained that they were hitchhiking to Lima because they lacked the funds for a bus ticket. This version of events raises several questions, as the women had already purchased plane tickets from Lima to Santiago, Chile, which is over 1,000 miles away. It seems illogical that they would attempt to save money by hitchhiking and risk missing their flight, which was scheduled for February 25th. This conversation with Pon allegedly occurred on the evening of February 22nd, making their decision even more puzzling. However, local police found witnesses who corroborated this unusual story. Since Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coni had no money for a hotel or hostel and needed a place to stay for the night, Pon reportedly offered them accommodation at his house, which they accepted. A taxi driver confirmed that he had driven Marina Menegazzo, Maria Jose Coni, and Pon to Pon's home. Following this, Pon returned to the bar with Rodriguez, as reported by Ecuadorian authorities, and continued drinking. Meanwhile, Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coni were left alone in the house. The intoxicated men returned home around 2:30 a.m., but the 2 women were no longer there. The police investigation revealed that Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coni had visited a nearby store to purchase soda before returning to the house. A store cashier confirmed this, indicating that the women still had some money on them. According to Pon's account, when they returned to the house, he stayed in one room with Maria Jose Coni, while Rodriguez was in another room with Marina Menegazzo. Pon admitted that he attempted to persuade Maria Jose Coni into a romantic encounter, but she resisted and tried to leave. In a fit of rage, Pon grabbed a stick and struck Maria Jose Coni on the head, killing her instantly. At the same time, he heard a scream coming from the other room. Upon entering that room, he found that Rodriguez had also taken Marina Menegazzo's life. Rodriguez immediately fled the scene, leaving Pon to contemplate how to dispose of the bodies. Pon attempted to erase all evidence from the house by wrapping the bodies in plastic bags and securing them with duct tape. In the afternoon, he borrowed a cart from an acquaintance and transported the bodies to a wasteland near the ocean shore, approximately 440 yards from his home. It is important to note that this account represents the official version provided by the Ecuadorian authorities. However, this narrative leaves several questions unanswered, including the origin of the marks on the girls' wrists and the presence of a potent drug in their blood, as revealed by toxicological analysis. Their families questioned the Ecuadorian authorities' account due to numerous inconsistencies in the case. They suspected a possible connection to human trafficking and believed that the authorities might be protecting someone. The families' doubts were fueled by several factors. The girls reportedly ran out of money but did not use their credit cards, suggesting they may have been coerced or deceived. Additionally, it was reported that they had been under the influence of drugs, raising further suspicions about the official account of their activities. Notably, the only people who claimed to have seen Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coni on the day of their disappearance were a select few who corroborated the authorities' version, including the bar owner, a taxi driver, and a cashier who allegedly sold soda to one of them. Furthermore, the town's relatively small population of 5,000 residents made it surprising that no other witnesses came forward. The families of the victims were puzzled by several aspects of the case. They could not understand why the bodies were found 2 days apart despite being only 43 yards from each other. It also seemed unusual that Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coney had sought help from Pon and Rodriguez instead of approaching one of the many Argentine tourists in the area. The brother of one of the victims reported seeing used syringes on the floor when he was taken to the crime scene by the Ecuadorian police. However, when he inquired about them, the syringes mysteriously disappeared. Furthermore, the syringes were not visible in crime scene photographs, and the experts who examined the area denied their existence. The family suspected that Pon and Rodriguez were involved in something more sinister, such as human trafficking, and that the official story was being used as a cover. The authorities responded by scheduling a second autopsy and a new toxicological examination. Additionally, it was discovered that both defendants had repeatedly changed their story about the events surrounding Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coney's deaths. According to one version, Pon denied involvement in the crime and claimed that the perpetrator was a Venezuelan illegal substance dealer known as El Chamo, who lived in the area. However, when questioned by the police, El Chamo denied any involvement and offered to take a polygraph test or provide a DNA sample to prove his innocence. The crime scene yielded several DNA samples, including those from Pon, the deceased girls, and some unidentified samples. Further testing revealed that the unidentified samples did not match Rodriguez, who was suspected of being Pon's accomplice, nor El Chamo, who was ultimately ruled out as a suspect. A second autopsy conducted by Argentine experts revealed that the girls had been in a state of vulnerability and were unable to defend themselves before their deaths. The autopsy also confirmed that they had been subjected to forced intimacy prior to being killed. Additional details emerged, including that Maria Jose Coney had bruises and scratches only on one side of her body, suggesting she may have been ejected from a moving vehicle. Furthermore, a new toxicological analysis confirmed that both girls had been administered a potent psychiatric medication capable of impairing a person's willpower. A wave of disturbing reactions spread across Latin America following the incident. Unfortunately, much of the public response blamed the victims, holding them responsible for their own deaths. The criticism extended beyond ordinary internet users to include prominent public figures. During the same period, Berlin hosted a tourism fair where Rira gave an interview to a German news agency. Her comments were alarming, as she stated that the deaths were inevitable given the manner in which the girls traveled. She also revealed that she had never visited Montenegro, a popular tourist destination, claiming it did not match her social status. These statements amounted to victim blaming at an official level, a deeply concerning reality. Following Rira Dera's interview, the Ecuadorian government issued an apology to the families of Marina Menegazzo and Maria Jose Coney, and one individual was dismissed from their position. Among those heavily criticized was Argentine psychiatrist Hugo Narton, who described the girls as favorable victims and implied that they had provoked others to commit crimes. After facing intense backlash, Dr. Narton stated that he had been misunderstood and emphasized that he never intended to excuse or absolve the perpetrators of responsibility. A Paraguayan student, Guadalupe Aosta, wrote a Facebook post in response to the online victim blaming, which quickly went viral, receiving over 700,000 reposts in the first week. The post began with the haunting words, "Yesterday I was killed." It continued to recount the violent events. "I refused to be touched, and they smashed my skull open with a stick, leaving me broken. They put me in a black plastic bag, sealed with duct tape, and threw me on the beach, where I was later found a few hours later. The aftermath of my death was more devastating than the act itself. When my body was found, no one bothered to investigate who had taken my life. Instead, I was bombarded with irrelevant and insensitive questions. What was I wearing? Why was I alone? Why did I, a woman, dare to travel by myself? I was in a high-risk area, so what did I expect? The authorities even suggested to my parents that I must have done something wrong, that I must have broken some rule. In death, the narrative imposed on me was that I was not considered equal to a man. My demise was somehow my fault. Had the headlines read, 2 young men found dead, the public would have been outraged, demanding justice and severe punishment for the perpetrators. The response would have been vastly different if I were a man. I am speaking out for myself and for all the women who have been silenced, marginalized, and oppressed. I am speaking out for every woman whose dreams have been crushed and whose life has been destroyed. I urge you to raise your voice to fight for justice and equality. I will be with you in spirit, and I promise that one day there will be so many of us standing together that our voices cannot be silenced. The trial commenced on August 8, 2016, but it was marred by several setbacks. The prosecutor was replaced 3 times, causing significant delays in the proceedings. Despite these obstacles, the prosecution presented a significant amount of evidence, including witness testimonies and over 200 physical items recovered from the crime scene. The police had discovered some of the victim's personal effects, biological fluids, and phones both at the house where the crime occurred and in the surrounding vicinity. During the trial, Pon asserted his innocence, claiming that his prior confession had been made under police coercion. This statement only strengthened the suspicions of the victims' families that Ecuadorian authorities were withholding information. Meanwhile, Rodriguez modified his testimony, suggesting that Colombian traffickers of illicit substances had been involved in their deaths. In the trial's first week, the prosecutor disclosed that he suspected additional individuals were implicated in the case. This suspicion arose from the discovery of 3 more male DNA samples at the crime scene, in addition to the DNA of Rodriguez and Pon. Ultimately, the court found both Pon and Rodriguez guilty, sentencing them to 40 years in prison, the maximum penalty permitted under Ecuadorian law. In November 2016, Ecuadorian authorities arrested José Luis Pérez Castro, a 34-year-old man, after his DNA was found at the crime scene. Castro's defense team argued that he had lived in the house a few weeks before the incident and that his DNA was present due to a dental infection. They claimed that he had spat blood onto the wall as a result of this infection. However, the defense's explanation for Castro's DNA being on the victims' bodies was that he must have touched an object or piece of furniture also handled by the police, thereby transferring his DNA. This argument began to unravel when a dentist testified in court. It was revealed that Castro had contacted the dentist 2 weeks after the bodies of Marina Minazzo and Maria Jose Coney were found, requesting a note to confirm his supposed dental infection. The dentist refused to issue the note, stating that he had found no evidence of any health problems during his examination of Castro. A man had been expelled from a dentist's office after seeking a medical certificate. The dentist declined to provide one, explaining that there needed to be an underlying medical condition causing pain, which he did not observe. This refusal dismantled Castro's defense. Meanwhile, while awaiting trial, Castro violated prison rules by posting on social media about his situation. In a statement, he expressed confidence that God would ultimately demonstrate his innocence. Despite his continual claims of innocence, Castro was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 40 years in prison, just like the 2 others, Alberto Pon and Eduardo Rodriguez. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video. And remember, the search for truth never stops.